Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talking to the Void. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, and today we're continuing the series The Death of the MCU with another tangent. In case you missed the first few episodes, I am currently releasing a series about why I have fallen out of love with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and why I think they've screwed up their future as a franchise. If you haven't watched the first few episodes, I'd highly recommend viewing them before this one, as this is a series that builds up my argument for why the MCU has screwed up its future. Today, I bring you a brief tangent about one of my favorite movies in the MCU, Thor Ragnarok. Although it may seem like this tangent doesn't connect to my overall argument about ways the MCU has screwed itself over, I promise it's all connected. Let's get into it. Before I move on to the third and most important warning sign, which will be covered in the next episode, I want to talk about Thor Ragnarok. It's one of my favorite entries in the MCU, but a lot of people hate or hated it because, at least from what I've heard from the haters, they didn't like how it changed Thor's character. But let me explain why it was actually a great segue into Infinity War. As we all know, Infinity War was a unique entry in the MCU because the Avengers lost. For the first time in Marvel history, the heroes lost the fight. Fan favorite characters died, the villain achieved his goal, and everything at the end of the film looked hopeless. Thor Ragnarok was the perfect setup to bring us into Infinity War. Yes, I know that Black Panther was the last film to be released before Infinity War, but in terms of the MCU timeline, the end of Thor Ragnarok took us directly into the start of Infinity War, and I feel that it did that seamlessly and brilliantly. But aside from that, Thor Ragnarok did a great job of setting us up thematically for Infinity War. To some, that might sound ridiculous. Those who hate on Ragnarok, from what I've heard, see it as a colorful, futuristic laugh fest that mischaracterizes the God of Thunder. However, I would argue that Ragnarok actually gives us the closest and most intimate view of Thor's true character. Ragnarok was full of loss for Thor. He loses his father, Odin, towards the start of the movie. Shortly after, he loses his beloved Mjolnir, as Hela easily breaks it within moments of arriving on screen. Thor then gets inadvertently set to the distant planet of Sakaar, where he is enslaved and forced to fight in a tournament for the entertainment of the planet's tyrannical leader, the Grand Master. Something I don't see many people talk about when it comes to all of the things Thor loses in this movie is how Thor quickly loses his sense of dignity, I guess, when he arrives on Sakaar. Nobody knows who he is. He's disrespected, beaten, and enslaved. That's going to come as a huge blow to a great and powerful god, but very few people actually talk about that bit. After a brief term of imprisonment with Korg, who is arguably my favorite character in the movie, Thor is forced to fight in a gladiatorial tournament, but not until Stanley himself, may he rest in peace, makes a cameo and cuts off Thor's signature blonde locks. Thor then proceeds to lose the fight with the Hulk due to the Grandmaster's intervention, just adding to this train of unjust losses. And although their deaths are brief and, in my opinion, criminally unmentioned basically in the movie, Thor also loses his friends when Hela arrives on Asgard. The Warriors 3, who were established as Thor's friends in the previous two Thor movies, are quickly and unceremoniously dispatched within moments of Hela's arrival on Asgard, except for Sif, who is mysteriously absent, but we'll worry about that later. And we don't even get Thor's reaction to this on screen at any point so far as I know, because he's going through way too many other bad things to even have a moment to grieve them. Flash forward, and when Thor finally arrives on Asgard, he fights Hela, loses an eye, add that to our list of tally marks of losses, and he ultimately loses Asgard itself, as the realm is destroyed by the previously introduced fire demon Surtur, so that Hela herself can be destroyed, thereby saving the remaining Asgardians. So to recap all of that, Thor loses his father, his hammer, his friends, his dignity, his hair, the fight with the Hulk, his eye, and his home planet. A lot of his personality and story are tied up in his relationships with his family, his identity as an Asgardian, and his prowess as a fighter. He loses his last remaining blood relative, his father Odin. He loses the fight with the Hulk, and he ultimately loses his home after losing a fight to his older sister Hela. For the audience, their visual connection to Thor is the image of this massive hammer-wielding god with long blonde hair. Who is Thor to the audience without his hammer and long golden locks? Ultimately, what I really like about Ragnarok is that it strips away so much that is important to Thor and shows us who he really is at his core, without these external defining factors. The perfect godly image from the previous two movies is stripped away, showing us more of the human side of Thor and allowing us to form a deeper connection with the character. And it is this process of destruction, loss, and stripping away that sets us up so beautifully for Infinity War, the one time that the heroes lose the battle. Now I am going to take us on a quick sub-tangent within this tangent, just to say that the visual changes to Thor's character were also a great setup for the visual changes to the rest of the characters in Infinity War, marking a definite change in the mood of the film. Almost all the characters in Infinity War sport clothing in much darker colors. Even the iconic brilliant red and blue of Spider-Man's suit is muted to shades closer to burgundy and navy with the introduction of his Iron Spider suit, courtesy of Iron Man. Captain America's suit is a muted, I would almost describe it as dirtier, version of his original red, white, and blue suit, and while we're used to seeing him clean cut, he has longer hair and a full beard. Black Widow, who we're used to seeing with red hair, instead is platinum blonde, almost white, although she still wears a dark suit, similar to her outfits from previous movies, if a little more military and practical. The characters that don't really change are the Guardians of the Galaxy, who are already a colorful bunch, Black Panther, and Doctor Strange, all of whom were comparatively recent additions to the MCU, so part of me wonders if they kept their costumes the same to avoid potential confusion. Anyway, enough rambling about costume symbolism, which I could go on for literal hours about, but on to warning sign number 3, which I will be addressing in the next episode of this series. That is all for this episode of my series, The Death of the MCU. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like this video and consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss my upcoming videos in this series. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Sending you all the love.